Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my Worlds 2025 Swiss Stage Day number 7 overview and analysis video. We are in our second day of the 2-1, 1-2 stage here. That's going to determine our final team to qualify at 3-1, at least in our second series of the day, and unfortunately our first team to be eliminated from the 1-2 section to see who can survive that matchup as well in our first series of the day. So definitely both series have a lot of consequences. We're reaching that point in the tournament where every single game counts, every single game matters, and everything kind of determines what the rest of your narrative is going to look like for the rest of the year. So a lot on the line for the 4 teams here today. If you haven't checked out the coverage that we've done on every single day of Worlds up until this point, I highly recommend you check that out. But I'm excited for today. Hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from these games? What did you expect from these series? Did they live up to your expectations, or were you perhaps a little bit surprised by the outcomes? Of course, I'll be going over my thoughts and opinions, my takes and everything as we go throughout this video, but it's always cool to hear from you guys. You guys have disagreed with me quite a bit, which I always like. You guys know I'm certainly not afraid of, like, people in the comments saying that my opinions are stupid. I've been getting that for 4 years on this channel. I'm happy to get it a little bit more, but let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Without further ado, though, let's go ahead and jump into the content itself. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go game by game across both of these best of 3s, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover, and at the end of the video, we're going to talk about the officially 5 teams that have qualified for the quarterfinals, and then, of course, the matchups that we are getting tomorrow, the end of the 1-2 stage, that will determine the other 2 teams that are eliminated in this section. But most of today will be spent on the games we got in, just a couple hours ago as this video is being recorded. But let's jump into our first series. The first one here is our elimination series. We are starting it off with the 1-2 section, and this is one of the more intriguing matchups, I would say. I would say it is the most intriguing matchup of the 1-2 stage, at least for me in terms of the draw, because both of these teams have looked inconsistent, we'll just say, at this tournament so far, and I think both of them would really like to get to 2-2. I think that would be considered an overachievement for both of them, considering how they've played up until this point. It's the number 2 seed from the LCP and Team Secret Whales taking on the number 2 seed from the LEC and Movistar Koi. Of course, neither of these teams have had a ton of success at this point, but Team Secret Whales has picked up a victory early on in the tournament. They beat VKS, Vivo Keed Stars, to be able to get themselves into that 1-0 section. They have unfortunately lost every single game since then, so no major surprises there. They haven't exactly had the easiest road, but they honestly haven't really had the hardest road either. They faced KT Rolster in the 1-0 section, and then, of course, FlyQuest in the 1-1 section. Weren't able to kind of, win either of those series, but I think a lot of the positives that we saw from Team Secret Whales have come through. Obviously, the VKS game in general was definitely a big positive overall for TSW, but I think the KT Rolster game was pretty well played, all things considered. I think a lot of the optimism that a lot of analysts had around Team Secret Whales going into this tournament has translated so far. Unfortunately, it did feel like a lot of that momentum kind of came crashing down against FlyQuest, which I think was by far their weakest game at the tournament. Hopefully, they can bring that back, but mid lane absolutely is a problem for this team. Dire was always going to be a bit of a weakness for Team Secret Whales, and Movistar Koi is perfectly positioned to be able to capitalize on that weakness. Now, Koi has not had a good tournament run. They start 0-2 at the start of this tournament as well, but they've been able to bounce back. They do pick up the win over Fnatic to keep their tournament hopes alive, and they get a very lucky, very positive draw for themselves with Team Secret Whales here. They're coming into this, in my opinion, as pretty big favorites. If they don't end up winning this series, I think that that would be a pretty bad look for this team, who kind of needs to perform well. They won the LEC in the spring split. Like, this is a team that should not be anywhere close to being one of the first teams out, but they've not shown that so far at this tournament. I think Fnatic was a complete gimme. That team was playing terrible at this tournament, and Koi was able to get past them. Team Secret Whales, I think, is a bigger challenge than someone like Fnatic was. We'll see if they can overcome it. Of course, the prediction is still Koi because they should be better. There is no reason for them not to be better. I think Team Secret Whales has been better at this tournament up until this point, but I do not believe that that will carry over. Let's see if that prediction is correct or incorrect. The only way to know is to go game by game, so let's get into game number 1. The winner of game number 1 was Team Secret Whales. They are going to pick up the 1-0 lead here in this series. They're going to look pretty good, I would say, all things considered, in game number 1, but especially in best of 3s, game 1 matters so much. Having to win both of the final 2 games is just so much more difficult, especially when your back is up against the wall, right? Like, when you've lost all this momentum for a team like Koi that's not really been able to beat anybody. They've only beaten another European team at this tournament. They have yet to win a single game against a region that is not the LEC, and, the confidence just might not necessarily necessarily be there for a team that needs to play with aggression. Now you lose game number 1, a game that you had entirely in the palm of your hand. You get this gigantic early lead through some nice plays with Elyoya and Supan Alvaro getting to play a 2v2 down in the bot lane, and everything kind of just comes crashing down. And that's even with what I would consider to be a complete draft gap. Now, once again, I'm not going to rehash everything that happened yesterday. I'm going to continue to stand on my point. Orianna is unbelievably broken. I do not think that champion is fair right now, at least in comparison to what your other options are, because I think she can fill 3 or 4 different roles at a high-end level. She can be a primary damage dealer in the late game. She can be your primary support in terms of the shielding and healing that you can go off of. She can be set up for ganks. She can skirmish really well. There's just not really a weakness to her game. She allows you to be much more aggressive and flexible everywhere else, and even if she doesn't have gold, Shockwave is almost always going to be the most important ability in any game that she's in right now, and it's really not all that difficult to execute on Orianna. She's a pretty straightforward and simple champion. I think she just checks every box, and so I'm never going to be a fan of a team giving that over, especially when you're spending 3 mid lane bans on the other side. Ryze, Taliyah, Azir, all taken off the board in the first rotation, and then you give over Orianna. It just feels like a pretty big mistake. Now, you do get Yunara as kind of the trade for that, but giving over the Trundle as well, another champion that I think is incredibly strong right now on the patch, it just kind of feels like there are some things going on. Like, you get the Scion, I guess, but Scion's not as broken as some people would make him out to be. I think he's very good for teams that already have good control of the map. I think he was strong in this game, but at the end of the day, like, Koi had a lead. They should have been able to run over this game, and then it was just mistake after mistake after mistake that ended up taking that lead, that 2-ish K gold lead that they had throughout basically all of the early game, and throwing it away. For Team Secret Whales, way to keep your head above water. This is a team comp that does want to play for the late game. You've got Scion and Yunara, both of whom are going to be basically unkillable as the game continues to go along, as long as the rest of the team ends up playing well. You have plenty of engage here with Jarvan and with Galio to be able to set everything up, and I think they capitalized on that well. But really, at the end of the day, it came down to Supa getting caught twice, not once, but twice, in multiple very precarious situations, and then the Corki just not having enough damage throughout a majority of this game to ever really be a complement to that Orianna. That setup is all well and good, but if you don't have any way to break through this Scion, Jarvan, Galio, Alistair frontline with, you know, something like a Corki, then you're just not going to be able to win the game. So credit to TSW for being able to take away that win condition. We'll say that's more on Koi than it is on TSW, but they at least capitalized on it. First off, player of the game is going to go to Eddie in the bot lane in the AD carry role here on the Yunara. I think he mostly was capitalizing on a lot of the creation that was happening from the rest of his team. I don't know if he was the one that was really driving the plot forward, but he certainly was the main character of Team Secret Whales. You have 4 enablers and a Yunara on this draft, so it's clear who they want to play for. And I think Eddie did his job. He stepped up and did as much damage as he needed to do in these team fights. He was aggressive with his positioning. He wasn't playing scared because he knew he had so much peel and so much engage throughout the rest of his team that as long as he was there and auto-attacking and trying to pump out as much damage as possible, as long as he was doing the most damage of anybody in the game, he was going to be just fine. And that's exactly what he did. For being the main character, he is going to get player of the game. He's not been perfect at this tournament. I think he's had a couple of games, specifically that FlyQuest game, where I was really concerned with his output, and I was a little bit worried that maybe I was too bullish on him in my primer because I was really high on him when I was watching my LCP tape. But this is more the Eddie that I remember from the LCP, somebody that can absolutely take over the game if given the opportunity. Also worth noting, Pun was in for the first time here on the top side over Hero. This has not happened yet throughout this tournament. I think Pun was always going to be a player that I had a little bit of a lower ceiling on in terms of just what to expect, but Scion in general is so incredibly strong that it's fine. It doesn't really end up, punishing him too much. Ends up being a worthwhile trade, and he can just kind of sit on the top side. They put a lot of resources into trying to take out this Scion in the mid game, and Orianna alone almost was able to do it. That's how broken that champion is she's almost able to just kill a Scion from full health if she full combos him, but unfortunately, just barely not enough damage to be able to break through that Scion, and he ends up being really stable and actually really helps TSW actually push the game forward from a tempo perspective. Histo and Dyer, I thought were solid. Histo had some great engages. Jarvan continues to rise again in terms of win rate. We all expected this as games get more important, as teams get better, and as this tournament goes along, Jarvan's going to be more effective. He was a champion that was a bit of a victim of bad teams playing him at the start of the tournament, and then Dyer, Taki, like, they were fine as well. No real major concerns coming in from the the rest of TSW. Eddie was definitely the main character on the Unara, but overall, I think the team just played well and deserved this win in game number 1. And for Koi, you got to feel a little bit frustrated. And honestly, I'm getting very concerned about this team because Supa was terrible in this game. Twice was he caught recalling and, just backing at the wrong place at the wrong time, potentially not paying attention to whether or not his back could be stopped, and he's killed. And all of a sudden, you're sitting at 1-4 as a Corki, despite picking up a 2v2 kill early on in the game. And now you just don't really ever have the damage to break through this front line. Orianna is incredibly effective, but you need something else if the team on the other side is going to play really, I guess, tanky, right? Like if you're going to be playing against Sion, Jarvan, Galio, Alistair, right? Like you need this Corki to be online, and Supa was just not good enough. He wasn't outputting enough damage in team fights. His positioning was pretty bad. He just did not have a very good game. Shox's breakdown at the end was pretty funny, all things considered. I don't know if it was necessarily worthy of that. I think there were some okay team fights, but at the end of the day, Supa was definitely the worst player on the Rift. He absolutely cost Koi in this game, and he more than deserved out of the game. I think Alvaro also really struggled to be able to find ways to play this Braum actually protective because Supa was so far forward and because nobody else really wants Braum in this game other than the Corki. Oftentimes he ended up actually just being engaged and actually just kind of diving in and trying to disrupt the backline of Team Secret Whales, which was more difficult for a Braum than it would be for a lot of other champions. Elyoya and Jojo had some great early game moments, and honestly, I think they played fine. Jojo could have played the mid game better, but he was definitely the most effective player on Koi, and Elyoya I thought was fine on the Trundle. It's a great Trundle game, an unbelievably good Trundle game, just couldn't really get away with it. And then Mirwin caught once around the Otacon that ends up really kind of sealing things for Team Secret Whales to be able to pick this game up. But outside of that, like Koi really just made some minor mistakes. They had a lead and they just couldn't keep capitalizing on it. They need to get more consistent going into game number 2. If they can hold on to their map pressure, they did a good job generating it. It's really just about their late games, which it has been all year long. But Team Secret Whales, they've looked good at this tournament. I think a lot of people were hyped and excited about this team. Can they be exciting enough to get themselves to 2-2 with a 2-0 series win here? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Movistar Koi. They are going to take game number 2. They are going to even up the series at 1 apiece, and they will stay alive and push us to a deciding game number 3. Thank goodness Koi is not going down without a fight. That would have felt really, really bad for this org, and I think generally for the expectations they had going into this tournament, I think people were generally higher on Koi than I was. I know I wasn't exactly, waving the banner of the LEC going into this tournament, but they've played pretty well. I think all things considered, Koi has not had an easy road, and I think being able to overcome Fnatic was obviously good for them, and now being able to be 1 game away from going 2-2 is really nice, especially with the team like G2 already in quarterfinals. I think Koi is looking a lot better. I think this was a pretty solid performance. Now, Secret Whales on the other side should not have lost this game. Let's be entirely fair. This team was up 4,000 gold in this game, and they ended up losing it on, Caitlyn and Nico and Ryze. Like, somehow all of that gold ended up being useless, which just feels bad. Like, it just feels like it shouldn't be possible to lose a game like this, but Koi was better in the late game. It didn't really matter that Secret Whales had this gigantic early game lead, that they had all the pressure, that every play they went for was positive. Basically, through Rift Herald, there wasn't a single play on the map that went Koi's way. Like, Eddie was able to take first tower incredibly easy on the Caitlyn, got super enabled. They were able to destroy the Grubs and be able to pick up all 3 of those without really any contest from Koi, and then they give over Herald, they give over all of these dragons at the start of the game. Like, it genuinely just does not feel like Koi has any fight left in them, but they end up recovering. They win 1 fight, and all it takes is 1 fight. That's only a 3-for-1, but it's still a 3-for-1 that basically equalizes the entire gold lead because Koi is able to grab the Otacon off of it, and all of a sudden the game is entirely in their favor. Credit to them, but really credit to this jungle mid, who I thought was incredible in this game. Whoever you want to give player of the game to, kind of up to you. Elyoya, Jojo, I think both of them earned it. Both of them were very, very strong. I'm giving it to Jojo. I think the Cassio was just a little bit more active. I'm not the biggest fan of the Cassio into Ryze counterpick. People, I've talked about that a lot on the channel over the course of this World Championship, even over the course of the domestic playoffs, where really the only thing that this does as like a quote-unquote counterpick, I mean, obviously both are going to be strong from a similar range point of view in team fights, and so it kind of negates Ryze's big damage output, but more importantly, everybody picks it for the miasma that can stop the Realm Warp. Really, the only time that's ever going to be valuable is when, Ryze is caught under tower and trying to Realm Warp out. You can obviously, keep him there. That's really the only only practical application of this counter pick in pro play nowadays, like after 2014 or whatever, people used to call the Cassio into Ryze counter pick. And we did see that this game. This was one of the few games that actually did get to utilize that actual counter pick tool. But JoJo was more useful than just being a counter pick to the Ryze in the mid lane. Like, he just generally was incredibly solid. I would say overall for Koi, his damage output was incredible. His movements around the map were really clinical. I'm not going to say he's carrying Koi, but he's certainly doing his best. Game number 1 was very solid for him on the Orianna, very broken champion, and I think he continued to be very good here in game number 2. He's definitely the main character of how Koi are playing the game right now, and that's kind of been the case throughout a majority of the year. And then Elyoya with a great game on the Qiyana. A lot of damage coming through in the late game. This champion has found a lot of success so far at this tournament. I think a lot of that is because it allows teams to play a lot more aggressive in the mid to late game, and if you over-aggress, if you like misposition against a champion like Qiyana, she can punish that a lot more than even something like a Xin Zhao or a Jarvan can. At least in terms of how pros are playing her right now. I think that's why her win rate has been so successful, because of her area control. And of course, Elyoya has always been a very good Qiyana player. I think people tend to forget that. Qiyana kind of gets associated with the LPL right now in terms of junglers, rightfully so. They've been excellent on this champion, but Elyoya is a longtime Qiyana player in the jungle, and I think he's pretty happy he got a chance to show that off here. Rest of the team was fine. Alvaro had some great disengages for the most part. Not necessarily the most proactive game from him, but it wasn't really a bad one. Supa continues to be really safe and really scared. He was really far down on Eddie in the laning phase, and once again, it really just feels like there's an AD carry gap in this series with Supa not really stepping up, but at least he was hitting those ultimates at the end of the game, and Mirwin was just kind of there, got completely blasted by this Renekton on the top side at the start of the game, but Ornn is more useful than Renekton, so just ended up kind of being that as the game continued to go along. It's a nice win, and obviously the most important one that Koi could pick up. And then for Secret Whales on the other side, this is a game that you really are going to feel bad for throwing away, especially depending on how game number 3 ends up going, because this should have been the end of this series. This should have been you moving on to 2-2 and you being able to play out the rest of this, but it didn't happen. You just weren't in the right position, and I think specifically Dire was terrible in this game. It looked like he was trying to make good decisions and then like going against the right decision to make the wrong one, and it just felt really poor, like really bad watching him try to play the map. I thought he was just really, really behind in this game. A lot of mental errors, a lot of actual mechanical errors in this game, and we highlighted a lot of this going into the tournament, right? In my primer video, I talked about how Dire was a bottom 3 player at this tournament for me. I think right down there with Boal from VKS. I think you can look at him as a potential like biggest weak link, right? I was really worried that Dire was just not going to be the kind of player that could actually keep up with a lot of international talent. Unfortunately, that has kind of been the case so far. He was pretty good against VKS and against Miru, which was definitely one of the more important games for him to be good in, but he is getting mega gapped right now by Jojo Pune. Not that that should surprise anybody, but it's certainly something that is worth noting. This Ryze was completely inconsequential. Pun as well on the top side ends up playing this Renekton, gets a ton of gold, gets a solo kill on the top side early. This Renekton is very enabled and then does exactly what Bwipo did yesterday, which is take a gigantic gold lead on the Crocodile, give it all back in one shutdown in one fight where he's just not able to land basically anything onto 4 targets and then become completely useless for the rest of the game. This Renekton pick is definitely looking more like bait at this tournament. I think it can be incredibly strong if your team plays the map well. Secret Whales did not do that in this game. The Xin Zhao was fine, but really the big strength of TSW and the player that is stepping up right now is Eddie in the bot lane. Awesome Caitlyn game. He absolutely deserved to win this. He was arguably the best player on the entire Rift for a majority of this game. It just didn't really end up mattering. Like I said, the AD carry gap in this series so far has been pretty massively in favor of Team Secret Whales. We'll see if Koi can turn that around, because it's time for game number 3. It's do or die. The winner of this game goes on to the 2-2 stage. The loser is eliminated from the World Championships. Everything is on the line for these two teams. Who's going to be able to come out on top? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Movistar Koi. They are going to take game number 3. They are going to take this series 2-1, and they will be moving on to the 2-2 stage, keeping their world's hopes alive, whereas unfortunately Team Secret Whales on the other side of this, despite their 1-0 lead, despite their 4K gold lead in game number 2, are going to fall and be officially eliminated from Worlds this year. This is not an upset. This is not a particularly surprising outcome. This is what we expected from these two teams. However, I think Secret Secret Whales deserves a ton of credit for how they performed at this tournament, basically entirely up to expectation for even the highest of expectations. I think that there were people that thought this could be the worst team at the tournament. Most of them probably didn't watch PSG Talon throughout a lot of this year, and obviously, you know, there were other teams that we expected to be lower, but Team Secret Whales was probably just as good as basically any of the other middle tier teams. They could have beaten a team like Movistar Koi here today. They were about 2-2 worthy as the number 2 seed from the LCP, and I think you have to consider that a success for this region, considering just how things have gone over the course of the last few years for this team to be kind of the Vietnamese, like the new version of Game. I'll just say that. Like they're kind of being marketed as the next big Vietnamese team and a lot of the next big Vietnamese players, and I think a lot of them lived up to the expectation at this tournament, really performing well. But Koi was just a little bit too good, a little bit too strong here in game number 3. It's pretty easy to talk about the two players that deserve, you know, player of the game and player of the series honors, but I think it's really up to you. Once again, very similar to game number 2, who you want to give each of those individual honors to. I'm giving player of the game for game 3 to Elyoya, mostly because I wanted both Elyoya and Jojo Pyun to have a player of the game in this series. I think both of them deserve a ton of credit for just how strong they were. Elyoya on these carry junglers, the Kiana, the Nefiri now in game number 3, and Jojo getting to play what I think a lot of people consider his signature champion in the Ahri on R5 here and really get to take over. Elyoya for me is going to get player of the game for game 3. I'm giving player of the series to Jojo Pyun in the mid lane because he was probably the most consistent throughout all 3 games, but both of them deserve major shouts. Elyoya was making his presence known early down on the bot side to really salvage a laning phase that was not going the way it should between Supa and Alvaro and Eddie and Taki. Eddie was incredible in this series, and we are going to get to that. You know, Supa was completely outplayed. Like, there was a gigantic AD carry gap, I think, really in all 3 of these games. Probably the least in game number 3, but still very much there in game number 3. But Elyoya very much able to salvage that bot lane and really push things forward. Once he started picking up some kills, once he got to like 3-0 and 3 on this Nefiri, the game was basically over because he could take over any team fight that they wanted to go towards. And there's really not a lot of easy ways for this team to actually capitalize on a Nefiri that's diving in. You don't have a lot of counter dive tools or anything like that for the Nefiri. Multiple triple kills, multiple dominant team fights coming through, a double-digit kill game for Elyoya in the closeout. The captain stepped up when he needed to, especially on these carries. This might be a style that I want to see Koi play for basically the rest of the year because they looked very comfortable playing through Elyoya on these carries in the jungle. But Jojo is getting player of the series as a whole. I think it was pretty clear that he was the most consistent player on the team. He was excellent on the Casio in game 2. He still was very good on the Orianna, definitely the best player on the team in game number 1 in that loss, but this Ahri is his signature pick for a reason. He was perfectly positioned in basically every single team fight. Really, the only times that Jojo Pyun died throughout this game were times where Secret Whales basically sold the entire farm to make sure Ahri, you know, wasn't going to survive. He picks up a solo kill later on in the game on Dyer on this Aurora, who just had a really tough series overall, but Jojo kind of equalized the fact that the AD carries weren't exactly in favor of Movistar Koi by being the better mid laner by an absolute country mile. So credit to Jojo Pyun. We know that this is in him. It's always been something that we've known Jojo can do at the international level, that he can do against anybody from a mechanical standpoint. I'm glad to see that he was able to make it, I guess, a reality in this series. So jungle mid really doing what they needed to do. I thought Mirwin also had a really good game, all things considered, on the Cassante. Hero was a nightmare on the other side, subbing in for Pun on the top side here, getting to play the Jace as his final game of the year here, but Mirwin very much took advantage of that. Alvaro, I think, had some phenomenal engages. I considered Alvaro for player of the game for game number 3. I think that flank in particular at the end of the game was beautiful, but basically every disengage as well, being able to make sure that this Nefiri and Ahri combo were as safe as possible throughout every fight. I think Alvaro deserves a ton of credit for that. Supa had a really bad day. I think he'll be fine. He's been okay at Worlds before this so far, and he was okay at Worlds last year as well. I'm not going to sit here and say that Supa is just a terrible player. It just was not a very good day for Supa. He's going to need to be better if this team actually wants a chance to compete at the 2-2 level, but this team is now one series away, one best of 3 away from qualifying for the quarterfinals of Worlds, something that seemed impossible at the beginning of this tournament with them starting 0-2. They've been able to fight their way back. And yes, Fnatic, Team Secret Whales, they're not exactly the most devastating of competition that you could possibly run into at this tournament, but they've done what they've needed to do. They've won the games that they've needed to win, and now they put themselves in a position where all they have to do is get a lucky draw or just be a little bit better on one day to get into the quarterfinals, which would be massive if a second LEC team got there. As for Secret Whales on the other side, obviously not the way you wanted this series to end. You were the better team for the first half of this series, and then from the second half of game number 2 onwards, it really just felt like you were completely outplayed. None of that should go on Eddie, who had a phenomenal day here and was really good, I would say, at this tournament. You know, was I would say as expected against VKS. Maybe he could have been a bit better against FlyQuest. In particular, that game really felt like he was outclassed, but he more than made up for it in the series against Koi here today, where basically in all 3 games, he was the win condition for TSW. He was just everywhere he needed to be. He played phenomenal. He did not want to lose here today. Unfortunately, the rest of the team not necessarily on that same wagon. He made a pretty big mistake, though, I will say, in this game, really when things got completely out of control, when TSW threw their small lead that they had generated in this game as well, was when Taki ended up getting caught, and then for some reason TSW, instead of just letting Taki die and just kind of ceding the pressure, send his Toe and Eddie in, and they dive him in and try to salvage the play, and they all die, and it turns into a 4-for-0, and all of a sudden that entire gold lead that TSW had done a good job generating is gone in an instant. So pretty big mistake, I would say. I don't know who's making that shot call, but Eddie was a part of the play. It wasn't a particularly good one. Really the only thing you can nitpick from him throughout this series, in my opinion. Everybody else was basically just worse than their opposition. Taki, I think, had a terrible game 3 here on the Leona, got picked multiple times, was in consideration for dead of the game for me. His Toe and Dyer were definitely weaker than their opposition on the other side. His Toe was generally okay, just way down in tempo on Elyoya, who had a great series, and Dyer was completely outclassed, quite frankly, by Jojo Pune. There was a gigantic mid gap in this series. And then Hero is going to get dead of the game for me. I don't think that's a surprise. This Jace was completely useless in game number 3. Unfortunately, he gets subbed in this 3rd game and ends up being the weakest performer on Secret Whales throughout the entire series. Not a great look for Hero, a player that I do still really like, but man, was he just kind of embarrassed in this series. Got solo killed on the top side to start the game, and basically from that point onwards, never really got to do anything again on the Jace, and it wasn't a good look. But overall, Team Secret Whales still should be proud of what they were able to accomplish at Worlds this year. It's been a long time since a team like this has been able to make an impact on the international stage, and I'm glad to see that, with a lot of the hype that they had generated getting second in the LCP, they were able to translate that to, at the very least, a respectable run here at the World Championships. But Movistar Koi is the team that's moving on. Again, there's a chance they draw a team like FlyQuest. I think that's probably their best case scenario to trying to get into quarterfinals. Fly looked terrible against G2. I think they looked completely mentally checked out. I think that could theoretically be winnable, even if they're going to be underdogs, but there's not a lot of easy matchups left for Koi to be able to take. Basically anything that they go into in the 2-2 stage, they are going to be underdogs in, but they're going to be going there nonetheless, and just giving yourself the opportunity and the chance to have an upset. One day, anybody can win a best of 3 on one individual day. Koi having that chance now is huge for them. But that's going to bring us to our second series of the day here, and instead of being an elimination series, we go back up to the 2-1 section to close that out with our final qualification series, at least of this stage, and it's arguably the biggest one, I would say, of the 3 that we got. Of course, Fly and G2, from a pure narrative perspective, simply had to be the biggest that we got, but these are probably 2 of the best teams left in the Swiss stage at this tournament going head-to-head. It's a matchup between the number 3 seed from the LPL in Top Esports and the number 1 seed from the LCK in Gen.G. Of course, Gen.G are massive favorites coming into this. They would be against anybody. Top Esports still kind of looked at as a team that's a bit, on the fringe of being one of the best teams in the world. At least that's been clear from the comment section on my videos. I'm definitely a bit higher on this team. I think without a doubt, they've proven that they are a top 5-ish team in the world and definitely deserve to be considered as such. Now, obviously, their matchup against KT Rolster did not go according to plan. I think that a lot of people would have expected them to win that, but they were not even able to take a game against KT. We'll see if they can get the rebound here. Things do not get easier going from KT Rolster to Gen.G, and that was probably Top Esports' easiest pathway to getting into the quarterfinals of Worlds. We'll see, obviously, if they end up getting punished for losing that and, really running into some walls at the end of this tournament. But for now, even with Gen.G dropping a random game to anyone's legend, the only thing that Gen.G have really lost over the course of this year are best of 1s. Best of 3s, best of 5s. They've been very difficult to take down in. They've only lost 1 best of 3 since the start of the spring split, that of course being against T1 in the regular season. And they've only lost 1 best of 5, that of course being to KT Rolster in the playoffs. And so you really got to make sure to get on this team early because they are going to run away with these long series. They have a deeper champion pool than you do, basically no matter who you are and who you run into. And they play the map better than anybody in the world. This is the best macro team, arguably of all time, in terms of the way that they have played on this, in this era, right? There are teams that were more clinical, but just with the way that the game is now, the fact that they can continue to play that classic LCK style in 2025 is just absurd. So we'll see if they're able to continue their run of form or if Top Esports might pull off a massive upset here and get themselves to the quarterfinals. The only way to know is to go game by game, so let's get into game number 1. The winner of game number 1 was Gen.G. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up in this series 1-0. Really nice performance from them in game 1. Basically the standard Gen.G game, sub 25 minutes and absolute domination, and it all came off the back of them having like 8 kills at 20 minutes into the game. Like, it just is the way that it is. This team does not need to actually win fights in order to beat you. They are almost always going to be more clinical at where they are putting their resources on the map. They are generating small leads over and over again. I cannot stress enough. I know I talked about this a bit in the intro, but the LCK style that Gen.G continues to play that a lot of teams have had to move away from, because with all the new objectives and, you know, skirmishes that you have to take on in the mid game, it's really hard to play this style now. You know, Gen.G just continue to tempo their way into unbelievable game states that other teams just have no way of actually dealing with. It's not like a top esports thing where they're just playing slow and passive. You know, we've seen this from this org at the World Championships before, but it's not like that for top esports in this. This is happening to literally every single team that even attempts to try and play against Gen.G. I mean, it's crazy how much control they have over the map, and honestly, there's not really a lot of ways you can stop what Gen.G did to top esports in this game, other than just being able to hands check a team that consists of Keen, Canyon, Chovy, Ruler, and Duro. Like, you see why it's so difficult to end up taking them down. Their biggest weakness is almost always going to be heavy skirmishes, but like, do you even win the heavy skirmishes? That's the question. For top esports, I like their draft. I think they definitely outdrafted Gen.G in this game. You're going into Vi, Talia, Lucian, and you have a Sion, you have a Nico for engages, you have something like Aurora in the mid lane that can open up the map a lot. Like, I really like the ideas and the identity behind the top esports draft. It just didn't really end up mattering because Gen.G just ended up playing better throughout this game. But, you know, at least you gave it your best shot. You just didn't have the firepower to keep up. We'll talk about Gen.G first here, of course, because they won game number 1. Duro was going to get player of the game for me. The only player to collect multiple deaths on this team is getting player of the game, but how can he not? After the performance that he gave, he's one of the best Braum players in the world. It's very, very clear that this guy just gets this champion. Like, it clicks for him in terms of how he wants to operate it. He is unstoppable in terms of peel. The engages, the ultimates this game were actually really valuable to be able to set things like Vi up for more aggressive, you know, follow-ups to be able to make things work. Keen as well on the rec side doing a really good job of that. But the peel in this game to keep Ruler alive in every fight, no matter how aggressive he was positioning, to keep Keen alive in every fight, no matter how aggressive he was positioning. I mean, Duro was just exceptionally good. It was basically unbeatable when Duro was going to play like this on the Braum. So I want to give him a ton of credit. You know, he's getting a lot of credit, I think, from everybody, you know, across the LoL esports world. I'm glad to have been early on the trend for Duro last year when he was on Fear X. But, I mean, to see this guy stepping up and just completely gapping teams at the World Championships, it's a really cool sign for somebody, you know, getting their first taste of Worlds action here. Ruler also deserves a ton of credit. I mean, this guy was just so greedy. Top esports put everything into trying to kill the Lucian at the end of the game. Duro, of course, deserves credit for peeling the Lucian away, like for making sure that he was as safe as he could be in these team fights. But Ruler's damage in this series was just absolutely ridiculous, or in this game was absolutely ridiculous. Great stuff from him. Chovy hits the most important ability of the entire game, that seismic shove in the fight. I want to say it was around like 12-ish minutes into the game where it actually looked like Top Esports was just going to peel apart and beat Gen.G in that skirmish and actually take a little bit of a gold lead. Chovy hits a 2-man seismic shove and the fight immediately changes. It's literally a game-winning play, but Chovy makes those so regularly that we honestly don't even care anymore. This guy just completely runs the map. Canyon had a phenomenal game on the Vi, really aggressive stuff. I continue to be Canyon's strongest defender, I think, in the world right now. I do not think he's been nearly as bad as everybody has been saying. You know, the comparison, it's not even really a comparison. It just reminds me so much of what everybody was saying about Ruler going into MSI this year, where they're like, oh, Ruler's actually not been that good. Like, he's on a low streak. It's like, do we just want to criticize players that are on good teams because they're not getting as many resources as everybody else? Canyon being worse than a lot of the junglers he was ranked below going into this tournament, absurd. Like, let's be entirely fair. Like, he did not play worse than most of the junglers he was getting ranked below. He's showing that, I think, at the World Championship so far. Now, to be fair, he did get a little bit gapped by Tarzan, but it was a best of one, so I'm willing to give him a bit more, you know, credence in that regard. Keen was excellent on the rec side as well. This champion looks really strong when you actually get to play from ahead, but overall, Gen.G are just insufferable to play against because their map pressure is ridiculous. Again, they're sitting at like 7-8 kills throughout a majority of this game, up 6,000 gold, and it's like, what do we even do? Like, how do you even play the game from that point onwards? They don't even have to fight you to win everything on the map. It's just unfair. And then for Top Esports on the other side, like, they tried. I honestly think they made a couple of really nice plays here. I think Hong had a really good game on the Nico. I think he was the best player on the team. He found a Miracle Pop Blossom, I believe around that third dragon, that ended up looking like it was going to change the entire game back in favor of Top Esports, and somehow Gen.G ended up winning that fight anyways. It's just ridiculous how that turns around. It was a great engage from the Nico, and he had a couple of great moments throughout this game, punishing Canyon for diving on the bot side as well. It just didn't matter, right? Like, you can't carry the game as Nico, even if you play a really good Nico game. But Hong, definitely the best player on Top Esports here. As for who dud of the game is, take your pick of the other four. All four of them ended up having similar impacts on the game. I'm giving it to Cream because I think the Aurora was the most useless. I think generally speaking, the one play that kind of stands out in my mind is probably the worst play of the game was him ulting in that siege down on the tier 2 mid lane and immediately just jumping into the backline of Gen.G and dying. It's a really bad play from Cream. It's way too over aggressive, but you know, you're going to have to live with that when you play with Cream in the mid lane. 369 picks the Scion, and this should be a massive Scion game when you look at Vi, Talia, Lucian on the other side, but he was useless. I think it's pretty reasonable to give him dud of the game as well. Jackie Love really misplayed a 2v2 early on in the game that got a support killed. I think that's maybe worth dud of the game. Kanavi never had pressure in this. Like, there are a lot of ways I think you can look at this in terms of dud of the game. To me, Cream was the worst, but again, pretty much anybody outside of Hong, I think deserves this. Hong played fine. He played like a player who wanted to win the game, and I don't think anybody else necessarily did anything. So Top Esports kind of looking at with their backs up against the wall up at a Gen.G team that's just a little bit better than them right now. You know, anything can happen in game 2 if they can equalize and take this to a game 3. Again, you don't want to, you know, count your chickens before they've hatched, but Gen.G demolished Top Esports really without any sort of, you know, problem with a weaker draft in game number 1. Game number 2 is definitely going to be an uphill battle. Are they going to be able to tie the series up and really assert themselves back into the series, or is Gen.G going to do what they likely should have done all along and qualify themselves for the quarterfinals? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Gen.G. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to take this series 2-0, and this was just yet another stomp coming in from Gen.G, where they just had full control of this entire game. Top Esports were making proactive plays. It felt like they were pushing forward, but it never felt like they were winning. It never felt like they had control of the game, even when they would catch out priority targets in big areas or trade 3 for 3 in fights. It never felt like they were able to separate themselves with the gold that they had generated from a team like Gen.G, who were just better across the map. All it takes at that point is one fight for Gen.G to be able to turn everything, and they had a couple of those over the course of this game. This team feels like an ultimate raid boss in terms of playing into them. It just feels like their map pressure strangles you out so much, and, you know, TES, of course, just not the team that has the responses and the answers to a problem like that. This will be a bit of a quicker overview in terms of maybe talking about the game and talking about the series, because nothing shocking really happened here. Nothing new really happened here. It's not like, you know, we saw anything that's really going to change my perception or opinion or the outlook of either of these two teams moving forward. This was entirely as anticipated for Gen.G and really for Top Esports as well. For as much as I do like this team and think that they are pretty solid and, you know, will be a quarterfinals team at this World Championships, assuming that they don't run into like a worst case scenario in the next round, but, you know, I don't really know who that would be. Maybe a T1, right? Like, that would be worst case scenario, but like, this team's not Gen.G. They're not going to be able to keep up with a team of this caliber. So let's talk about it. Player of the game, I mean, come on, who do you want? Like, take your pick, man. It should probably go to one of the two carries, either Chovy or Ruler. Both were excellent in this game. Chovy just playing on his health bar perfectly. Like, this guy lived 4 or 5 fights throughout this game with sub 100 health and just never really was in the biggest amount of danger. That first blood in the mid lane was absolutely disgusting from him, where, you know, it looks like he's going to get dove by Kanavi under tower, and he just turns it and instantly kills Cream with basically 0 HP left. It's a ridiculous play to end up happening. Of course, credit to Canyon for being able to help facilitate and assist in that play, but Chovy was excellent. But I'm going to give it to Ruler. I think he was definitely a bit more consistent down the stretch of the game. Chovy caught out in side lanes a couple of times, had a bit of that faker syndrome in him in this one, where it just felt like he had that global taunt on at all times. Top Esports constantly looking to take advantage of the Yone, and I think at times that did put him in some more aggressive situations than maybe he wanted to be in. Ruler was basically perfect throughout this entire game, was untouched in most fights, was willing to dash in and do, you know, maximum amounts of damage if he needed to. This is just one of those games where it's like, oh yeah, that's Ruler. That's the best AD carry in the world. Like, you don't really have to think about it all that much. This guy can play any team fight out from neutral. He only dies once throughout this entire game. Unbelievable stuff. But Chovy was also excellent. And honestly, if you wanted to give Chovy player of the series as a whole, I have no qualms. He was unbelievably good on the Talia in game number 1, hitting the game-winning seismic shove, and was great as well here on the Yone. But player of the series for me is going to go to Duro in the support position. I don't think this Rakan was quite as sexy as the Yone or the Kaisa or even really the Jarvan was in this game, but boy, was this Rakan like dangerous to play into and really devastating in terms of a lot of the creation that Gen.G was going for. It really felt like, a lot of the aggressive plays that Top Esports were making on the other side had to be into the Rakan, the only one playing on the edge of danger, and Duro was navigating that incredibly well. He ends up pulling a lot of Hong's resources towards the end of the game on the Leona just for both disengage and to try and find a pick at the start of these fights, and in doing so and in being so safe and playing on that edge of danger so well, he ends up creating even more space for champions like Jarvan and Yone to be able to operate, being able to posture before these fights. So Duro was incredible. I thought he was excellent in game 1 and was still very good in game 2. That, for me, is a player of the series worthy performance as this team qualifies for the quarterfinals. Canyon was solid as well. Already brought it up. A lot of great cataclysms coming in from the Jarvan, being able to trap key members throughout fights, specifically this Pantheon, making it a lot more difficult for him to actually play out a lot of these 5v5 skirmishes at the end of the game where he already is much weaker than what we expected, or I guess what he was for a majority of the year. Keen had some problems in this game. Certainly not the perfect Ornn game, like not the best he's ever played, but you know what? It didn't even really matter, and honestly, it never even really came up that this guy wasn't playing team fights all that well on Ornn because Gen.G were just so clinical everywhere else. Even when he would make some massive mistakes in terms of when and how to engage, the team would somehow trade 3 for 3 in that exchange, and it wouldn't really matter. So credit to Gen.G. They're just so difficult to find ways to break through because of how strong the individual skill of their players are. This really just was a hands diff. The macro diff just kind of comes with the package for Gen.G. And then for Top Esports, unfortunately, this loss does mean that they have not yet qualified for the quarterfinals. They will go to the 2-2 section, and there are multiple matchups there that I think would be very dangerous. Imagine if this team drew something like a BLG that they already lost to twice domestically, or a T1 that you wouldn't necessarily favor them in. Like, they are not out of the Swiss stage just yet. That is certainly not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. However, I'm not blaming them for this loss. I don't think you can sit here and look at this team and say that they should have done anything other than lose this series. It really did feel like they just got hands checked, that they weren't talented enough to be able to go up against Gen.G. Their macro was okay, but Gen.G's is better, and their hands were okay, but Gen.G's were better. Like, Cream was not good enough in this series. He's gonna get his second dud of the game in a row, but like, he at least went for plays. Like, he wasn't scared in this game, and I think that would have been more alarming to me if Top Esports rolled over and died. At least they were looking for fights down the stretch of the game. They just couldn't actually win any of them because they're not Gen.G, but nobody is Gen.G in terms of hands at this tournament. You need to beat them in other ways. You need to generate tempo in the early game, and Top Esports just were not capable of doing that. I think the Pantheon Azir combo is a big mistake. Azir is very strong right now, as a lot of people know, but Pantheon is one of those champions that not only is much weaker than people think he is, but also, like, how are you ever supposed to take advantage of Azir's biggest strengths when Pantheon is a complete non-factor in team fights? You're basically playing 4v5 throughout the entire backend. That's where his biggest hits have been, made in terms of his nerfs, is that he's just not all that great as a combat, unit anymore. If you really want to think of him like that, like, he is awesome in the fact that he can, use his macro ultimate to get around on the map, but in these skirmishes, he is much weaker, and certainly in team fights, he's much weaker than he was for a majority of the year, and I just don't really like the synergy that he brings on B3 here. I don't think it really ties the comp together in any meaningful way, especially when you're already showing Azir and Yunara as your other picks in this draft, but Cream still needed to play better. I mean, the shuffle at the end of the game was pretty emblematic. Ruler's eyes kind of lit up, and it's like, oh, this is what it's supposed to look like when Azir misses his shuffle onto me and I can actually play the fight. Obviously, Medic makes a joke at the end of this game as well about a better Azir ultimate hitting Ruler previously, but, it just is what it is. Cream never really had tempo, was constantly taking advantage of in side lanes. Like, wasn't a great series from him. Hong was much worse here in Game 2 than he was in Game 1. Really, the only redeeming quality of Game 1 was Hong's Nico. Not really the case here. Jackie Love's scoreline is probably better than his gameplay would indicate. Same for, 369 and Kanavi, both of whom I think were fine. Kanavi probably the best player on the team in this game, but again, only so much you can do on the Pantheon, especially with a Jarvan on the other side. So just not really a great showcase, I would say, from Top Esports, but not a surprising one. I'm not sitting here feeling much lower on this team because they lost to Gen.G. Everybody should be losing to Gen.G. That's kind of the expected outcome. If anything else happens, that is a bit of an upset. If Top Esports were able to take a game off of Gen, I would have been more surprised. So they moved down now to 2-2. Still a reasonable chance for them to get out. Teams like Fly, CFO, Koi, who won earlier today, all of those should be qualification series for Top Esports, but, they put themselves in a position where 2 of the 5 potential opponents they have going into the next stage could be very difficult for them to take, advantage of and to actually win and get into the quarterfinals. And for a team that started 2-0, that's certainly not what you want to hear. But Gen.G doing what they should have done all along and getting themselves into the quarterfinals. No major surprises there. The only shock is that this team didn't go 3-0 in the actual Swiss stage here, but maybe this extra game time will help. Getting to play another best of 3, or I guess a best of 3, since they were in the 1-1 stage, is definitely good to be able to build up some experience, and something tells me that this team is going to be just fine moving into the next stage of the tournament. All right, but that is going to do it for my Worlds 2025 Swiss Stage Day number 7 overview and analysis video. Congratulations to Gen.G. They joined the 4 teams that have already qualified for the quarterfinals, of course being Anyone's Legend and KT Rolster going 3-0, and then yesterday Hanwha Life and G2 grabbing the spots from 2-1. Gen.G joins them as the 5th team here, and only 3 more are going to remain, and they're all going to come out from the 2-2 stage. And so, you know, it's definitely going to be interesting to see who ends up getting there in the first place, but also what those matchups are looking like, because with only 3 spots remaining for the quarterfinals and many teams that expected themselves to be in the quarterfinals, you know, there's going to be a lot of interesting matchups coming on in the later part of this Swiss stage, and that's what we see here in the overall Swiss stage graphic that we have put at the end of every video. 2-1 is now done. Fly, Top Esports, and CFO unfortunately not going to qualify. Will have to qualify through the 2-2 stage, but G2, Gen, and HLE, as we saw, are through. As for the upcoming matchup that we are going to get, it's the final of this stage, and it's the final 2 1-2 elimination matchups. Bilibili taking on Vivo Keedstars, and 100 Thieves taking on T1. Of course, 2 massive favorites in the series. If anything other than a 4-game day ends up happening, I think that will be a bit of a miracle for the LTA, because Bilibili should be able to decimate Vivo Keedstars even with the level that they had been playing at throughout this tournament. I think this long break might have actually been very good for them. Obviously, they need to show that they aren't what they've been throughout this tournament, because losing to G2 is obviously not great. Like, that's a team absolutely you should be beating, but losing to 100 Thieves on day number 1 is really something you need to reconcile with, and VKS should be the team that ends up getting you back on track. This is kind of a gimme game, as it is for T1. Now, T1 has had a much more difficult pathway here. They should not have lost to CFO. That's still an upset, and that's still something that I think they're regretting in terms of a best of 1, but it's a best of 1. Losing to Gen.G in the 1-1 section was expected. This team being here isn't all that surprising after that loss to the Oysters. The question is, can they continue to dominate back up to their own standards? They should not have any trouble with 100 Thieves, and I imagine that BLG and T1 are going to be walking away pretty easy from tomorrow's games. But the real interesting part is, after tomorrow, we are going to get the 2-2 draw, and that's going to determine everything. Likely, it is going to determine the final 3 teams going to the quarterfinals, and who might get screwed, who might get blessed in terms of a pairing. There are plenty of different outcomes with the teams that have officially qualified for that 2-2 stage, being Fly, Top Esports, CFO, and Koi already. So excited to see what that ends up being, but let me know what you expect both from the games tomorrow and from the draw tomorrow down in the comment section below. Always curious to know what you want to see and what your expectations are. But that's going to do it for today's video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're covering every single day of Worlds on this channel, as we always have done. So tomorrow's video will be going up tomorrow, of course, and then we get right into the qualification stage at 2-2, and then the quarterfinals. Everything from that point onwards is the biggest deal that you can possibly have in League of Legends. So excited for this tournament to kick into that best of 5 gear so shortly. If you're interested in that, hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all